Senator Fifield.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. I move that the Senate notes the Gillard government's $120 billion budget black hole. Madam Acting Deputy President, as I rise to my feet, it occurs to me that I've spent my entire professional life either talking about Labor debt and deficit or helping to repay it. Essentially, my entire professional life has been spent cleaning up after the Australian Labor Party, working in the Greiner government, where we inherited from Labor debt and deficit. And I should note in passing that the opposition leader for that entire period was none other than current Senator Carr, who opposed each and every measure put forward to repay debt and get the budget back into balance. I worked for the Kennett government, where we inherited debt and deficit, and the job was, again, to seek to repay that debt and get the budget back into balance, and again, without any assistance at any time from the Australian Labor Party. And so when I found myself in 1996 working for the then Treasurer, Peter Costello, it was, as Yogi Berra would say, deja vu all over again. A $96 billion deficit, $96 billion in debt, I should say, Madam Acting Deputy President, a budget which was $12 billion in deficit, and we set about repaying that debt. And again, it was without any assistance from the Australian Labor Party. In fact, the Labor Party opposed each and every measure put forward to get the budget back into surplus. And it took us the best part of a decade to completely eliminate that $96 billion of Labor debt. The best part of a decade. It's easy to rack up these bills. It's much harder to pay them down. And so successful were we in doing so and establishing, I think, what was widely accepted as a new and better fiscal paradigm. But then opposition leader Mr Rudd was at pains to ape the Howard government, to present himself as a slightly younger, slightly funkier version of John Howard. And he was essentially putting forward the proposition to the Australian people that it was safe to vote for the Australian Labor Party because it would be a status quo situation, that there was essentially no difference. And Mr Rudd went to the extent of appearing in those television ads, which I'm sure we all remember, where he put his hand on his heart and said, "I'm often accused of being an economic conservative. It's a badge I wear with pride." He was, and I see Senator Wong smiling because it seems so farcical. It seems so farcical. Anyway, you're with me, and that's the main thing, Senator Wong. But it now seems so farcical to remember Mr Rudd saying, "I'm often accused of being an economic conservative, but it's a badge I wear with pride." She likes it. Madam Acting Deputy President, the very sad thing is that too many people believed Mr Rudd. Too many people believed that the Australian Labor Party had learnt the lessons of the past, that it was bipartisan commitment to balanced budgets, to living within your means, to economic conservatism. That's what the Australian public believed. And Mr Rudd was guilty of misleading and deceptive conduct. He was elected, in effect, on the back of a lie. We know Ms Gillard was elected on the back of a lie that she would not introduce a carbon tax. But the lie that Mr Rudd put forward was no less significant, that he would be an economic conservative, that he would preside over balanced budgets, that he would not rack up massive debt as previous Labor governments had. And so the election came and went. Mr Rudd became Prime Minister, Mr Swan became Treasurer, And look, they were talking a good game, you've got to say. Their very first budget, Mr Swan said, we're budgeting for a surplus of $21.7 billion in 08-09, 1.8% of GDP, the largest budget surplus as a share of GDP in nearly a decade. No, it did not come to pass. And it reminds us, as if we need reminding, that what is in a budget speech, what is in budget papers, when it forecasts a surplus, or when it forecasts a lessening of debt, or when it forecasts a smaller budget deficit than the year before, that is all it is. It is a forecast. It is nothing more than that. Now, the global financial crisis came along. It's such an unlucky government, this one, Madam Acting Deputy President. If it's not one thing, it's another. And so we had the global financial crisis. If you believe the Australian Labor Party, it was the first time in human history that there had ever been economic uncertainty. It was the first time in human history that a government had ever faced significant external shocks, and it was of such a magnitude that it wouldn't matter what happened.
Order.
That it wouldn't matter.
Order.
Madam Acting Deputy President, I'm noting, in effect, the tone and the language that the government used at the time, that this was something which was completely unprecedented, that they had no option but to go into deficit, that they had no option but to spend massively, to waste massively. But I do contrast that, Madam Acting Deputy President, with the Asian financial crisis. Now, we are much more enmeshed in the Asian region than we are enmeshed with Europe, than we are enmeshed with the United States. The Asian financial crisis, our region, where we are, our major trading partners were in recession. But despite that, and without massive fiscal stimulus, without massive waste, we still continued to grow. It is not automatic that recessions elsewhere lead to recession in your own country. Now, the global financial crisis, yes, it was a real event, but Europe, the United States, was the genesis and the epicentre of that. It was not automatic that we would go into recession. And what saved us from recession, Madam Acting Deputy President, wasn't the economic stimulus. It was the fact that we have a floating exchange rate. It was the fact that we had strong demand from China. It was the fact that we had the world's best prudential regulatory arrangements, courtesy of Mr Costello. It was the fact that the Reserve Bank cut official interest rates. It was the combination of those factors which led to Australia coming through the global financial crisis in good condition. It was not because of this massive stimulus. And I think it's important to look at that contrast between how we fared during the Asian financial crisis and how we fared during the global financial crisis, and what the Howard government did at the time of the Asian financial crisis and what the Rudd government did at the time of the global financial crisis. But, Madam Acting Deputy President, it seems that this government just cannot take a break. Luck never goes their way. Even if you accept the thesis of the other side in relation to the global financial crisis and the budgetary situation in the year or two after that, it in no way explains the fiscal situation since then. We have heard time and again those opposites say that the reason that the budget is in deficit year after year after year is because of revenue write-downs. Now, there have been revenue write-downs. I acknowledge that. But if you look at the budget papers year by year by year, under this government, the overwhelming reason why the budget is in deficit year after year after year is not revenue write-downs. It is because of policy decisions. And what policy decisions mean is spending decisions by the government. That is the overwhelming reason why the budget is in deficit year after year. It is because of spending decisions.
It's not true. It's actually not true. If you look at the 2009...
Excuse me, senators won't debate across the chamber. Senator Fifield has the call.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. And we're seeing here that very debate. It's not revenue write-downs that accounts for the Australian budget being in deficit year after year after year, and assertions to the contrary don't make that proposition true. It is because of policy decisions of this government. It is because of spending decisions by this government. Mr. Acting Deputy President, as if it wasn't bad enough that this government has failed to live up to the promise that they presented leading into the 2007 election to be good and conservative economic managers, as if it isn't bad enough that each and every budget forecast for deficit has been well and truly exceeded at the time of the final budget outcome, as if that isn't bad enough, Mr. Acting Deputy President, the government has embarked on a new path of fiscal recklessness, and that comes in the form of the new $120 billion budget black hole. And the genesis of that are a series of unfunded, grandiose commitments, some of them worthy in their aspiration and some of them not. That which is worthy in its aspiration is the National Disability Insurance Scheme. A scheme, according to the Productivity Commission, figuring as amended by the Australian Government Actuary, which would cost in a full year about $7.5 to $8 billion a year. The reason for that figure is simply a product of the unmet need for Australians with disability, who need aids and equipment, who need supported accommodation, who need respite. That is a worthy aim. But in the case of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, the government have only allocated over the forward estimates $1 billion of the $3.9 billion the Productivity Commission said was necessary for that first phase. So it's been massively underfunded, and the government have given no indication as to how a full national rollout of the NDIS would be funded. Then we have the dental scheme, which Minister Plibersek announced the other week. And depending on who you listen to, depends on whether it's funded or unfunded. Ms Plibersek said, when asked how it would be funded, that it was all new money and that decisions would have to be taken as to how to fund that. She said it was all new money. The Prime Minister, on the other hand, said, no, it's not all new money, that this is essentially a savings measure. When you have a Prime Minister and the substantive minister on a multi-billion-dollar announcement being unable to agree whether something is a savings measure or requires new money, you know that there is absolutely no fiscal rigour left in the outfit. We then have Gonski, which, again, look, there are some elements of Gonski which are fine and worthy in their aspiration, but it's a pipe dream. It's a pipe dream, not a dollar put towards it. And we're seeing the emergence under this government of a pattern where a grand announcement is made. You may have a little bit of money, in the case of the NDIS, put towards it, but none in the case of Gonski. You may have a little bit of detail provided, as is the case with the NDIS, or none in the case of Gonski. Just enough to give the illusion of activity, just enough to give the illusion of substance. You will then have the Prime Minister picking fights with the states, demanding of them through the airwaves things which are news to them. And then when the states say, look, we'd like to have a chat about this, this is meant to be a nation where cooperative federalism is the order of the day. When the states say we want to chat about this, when the states say, hey, could you give us a little bit of detail, the Prime Minister then seeks to excoriate the states, well, certain states, Liberal states, for being against proper support for people with disability, for being against every kid in Australia having a decent education. We have these fabricated, confected fights to convey the illusion that only the Labor Party cares about people with disability, that only the Labor Party cares about quality education. And then the final element of this new pattern that we see is that the government will seek to introduce a token piece of legislation. I think we're going to see by the end of this year some legislation with the brand of Gonski. I suspect all that legislation will do is to essentially say that it's a good thing that kids get a good education. I think that's all it'll do, I've got to say, Mr Acting Deputy President. And I would suspect, although we haven't seen it, that the legislation that the government puts forward for the NDIS may technically formally establish a National Disability Insurance Agency, but we won't have details of eligibility criteria. We won't have details of scheme design. We won't have details of how the scheme will be funded. We won't have a commitment to a full national rollout by 2018-19. What we're seeing is an attempt to deceive the public, a systematic, deliberate attempt to deceive the public, that these sorts of announcements, Gonski, dental, NDIS, constitute a comprehensive policy by this government which will be legislated, which will be funded and which will be introduced. It is nothing of the sort. I think there are two possible explanations for this scenario, Mr Acting Deputy President. One is that the government have been complete frauds, that they've got no intention of introducing the Gonski arrangements, they've got no intention of properly implementing an NDIS, that they've got no intention of doing what they want to do on dental, disagree with it though we do, that they've got no intention, that they just want to provide enough evidence of activity to convince people that they're serious. The other explanation for this situation we find ourselves in is that the government really want to do these three things, but they are just so absolutely and hopelessly incompetent that they cannot bring forward detail, they cannot bring forward implementation plans, and that they cannot find the money. They're the two explanations, that they're serious and they're genuine, but they're also genuinely hopeless, or they are deliberately and systematically deceiving the Australian public. They're the two explanations, Mr Acting Deputy President, and I'd be interested if you could hazard a third explanation. But they are the two options which are before us. And the effect is, the result is, the cumulative effect, $120 billion of unfunded commitments. And you can throw into that number, into that figure, the money which is required to support the situation with asylum seekers. I think the situation is, Mr Acting Deputy President, that the government are actually pursuing a con, that they're gearing up for opposition, that they have no intention of finding the money for these programs, that they have no intention of actually delivering them. That would be appalling, that would be deceitful, and it should be condemned. I hope that the government prove me wrong. I'd love that, Mr Acting Deputy President, because I would love to see a national disability insurance scheme. But I've got to say, I'm seriously doubting the government's bona fides.